Thanks. So thanks first of all, Nadav, for the great presentation. I've actually seen that before because Nadav and I have met before. I have to say we're getting much less academic right now when it comes to the chemistry, the physics of and the physicalities of biochar. But I hope it's not getting less interesting in that, because what we're trying to do is bring money to you guys, which I hope is a good thing, which I hope is something you are looking for. So I have this very dry title of Scaling Negative Business by Aid of Carbon Credits in the context of net zero, which is carbon finance, basically, which is a thing I guess everyone is hearing about quite a lot at the later stages, and which is the very core of what Puro.Earth is doing. So that's our very key goal. That is what we're here for. So basically, I will tell you about Puro.Earth as a standard, as a methodology provider, and how that leads to carbon finance and how that leads to the scaling of the net negative business by the aid of carbon credits. I'm Benno Fuchs. I'm located, unlike the rest of the company, from Finland. I'm located in Germany, in Munich, and I'm leading the operations in EMEA, which means that I'm basically working with the entire operational teams, being account managers who speak most of the times with the supply side, which we consider biochar projects to be. I'm very happy to see one or two names that I've spoken to before. So hi to everyone who we've spoken to in the past. And without anything further to do, I would now jump into the presentation. I hope you guys have to tell me the baby starts screaming in the back. Just let me know if it's getting too loud. Then I will have to switch the audio a little. So what is Puro.Earth? Puro.Earth basically and mainly is the world's leading crediting platform for engineered and hybrid carbon removal. And we see ourselves mainly as a standard for that. We used to have a different path. We used to be a marketplace for the selling and the trading of carbon credits that were mostly derived from biochar projects. So mostly they came from this very source. But we pivoted a little, and what we want to do is we want to focus on our core strengths, which is providing a standard for biochar projects, specifically because biochar still makes the vast majority of the projects we have, in order to get certified against. So in order to get carbon finance for any project, they need to prove their credibility. They need to prove their transparency. They need to prove that what they are doing is not just something that was made up and that somebody calculated in an Excel sheet, but that really has a sound, both academic basis, but also a sound basis when it comes to the figures, when it comes to the accounting in the end. So for that reason, we're not just a standard for carbon removal, we're also an issuing body and a registry. So that means we give a guideline for what is, we think, that the consensus of the state of the art of academics when it comes to the carbon sequestration potential of, for example, biochar. If then there will be a certificate produced from it, that needs to be tracked somewhere. That needs to be issued as a certificate. That needs to have some kind of unique number for the outside world to understand what that was, because what we need to prevent in the carbon markets is double counting. So everyone needs to understand that if one of you guys produces a carbon credit, that this is traded only once and retired only once, and this is what the registry and the issuing bodies is there for. We also see ourselves as an innovation platform. So we used to be we were founded in 2018, and in 2019 we started with the first methodology for biochar, which was way ahead of the rest of the market. We're trying to continue to be an innovation platform. So biochar plays a major role, but we also just recently published the methodology for enhanced rock weathering, for example. So we keep trying to bring possibilities to projects that are net negative in order to get carbon finance. And last but not least, what we do is we help funding for new projects, which means that we have a team that is called Supplier Funding Solutions that develop both methods for existing projects to scale up. So in case there is a biochar production, there's not enough finance currently in order to scale up. We help you find investors that are mostly interested in the climate perspective of the projects, or we also help by aid of introducing things like the so-called pre-call, which is a possibility to get upfront payment for a production that is yet to be done. And now the figures have been shown here all the time. That is this year, the signed projects that are starting, it's 74 projects, most of which will be biochar, spread across 17 countries that represent nearly 351,000 tons of carbon dioxide that was removed from the atmosphere. So it's none of those avoidance projects. Those were really removed mainly by the aid of biochar. So that gives an idea of the scale of the number of projects we're working with. We currently have another 260 projects in the pipeline that are about to get on the market. So the proof of concept has definitely been brought already. And let me give you a quick glimpse on what it is that we consider as current methodologies and current ways that the market accepts to produce carbon credits. Mostly, we will be focusing on biochar, obviously, in this presentation, because biochar is what it's all about, and it's been the really most important thing to kickstart the entire operations of what Puro did and what the market did, because biochar was basically one of the first industrial scale level projects that allowed a more hybrid or a more engineered approach to how carbon can be sequestered and how carbon can be used to compensate for emissions in the end for projects. So we basically have two methodologies that we guarantee 100-year permanence at least, which would be biochar and the woody biomass burial. And then we do have methodologies which are mostly mineralization, which would be carbonated building elements and the enhanced rock weathering, but also geologically removed carbon that would provide an even higher permanence. We do understand that there are discussions on how long biochar will stay in the soil, how long the carbon will stay in the soil. What we are doing is we're not saying it's just staying for 100 years. We just take a look at the degradation curve and take a snapshot at 100 years and say, this is what's left at 100 years. This is what we guarantee the buyers later to have a guaranteed contracted permanence of carbon that they are acquiring when buying a carbon credit from our suppliers. And the question is now, how do we come up with those methodologies? It's not that we just think they're nice and that we just invented them ourselves, but what we take is we take a look into the market, into what's happening in terms of projects, into what academia says, and bring that to our advisory board. So we do have an advisory board that is being led by Professor Miles Allen, who is the director of the Oxford Net Zero Initiative. He's also the author, or one of the authors, of the Oxford Core Carbon Principles for Offsetting, and leads our advisory board, which is basically the checks and balances that we have when creating a new methodology. So what we're having here is basically the creme de la creme of of scientists, of the major players, specifically in the carbon removal market. And just to name one person, for example, there's Nikki Batchelor, who's leading the climate fund that came from Elon Musk, the $100 million climate fund. So we really have the highest profile scientists that will help us understand whether the methodologies that we work on are credible, are up to date, and we do revise our methodologies. Our methodology for biochar has now been revised for the third time. So while we offer chances for the projects to work on and to be certified against our methodologies, we also constantly revise and improve what we're doing. And now we've talked a lot about the carbon credits or about the cork, because the cork is what we call our carbon credit. So let's get a little deeper into what that specifically is. So what is a cork? Cork stands for CO2 removal certificate. And the equation is relatively easy. I mean, it's really easy you need to remove carbon from the atmosphere. That is something we've been doing for thousands of years already. That's not a mystery how to do that. The tricky part is now how to sequester it and how to store it. And you guys are much more experts than I personally am on that. But it's the very most important part is the storage. Where does it go finally? Only if it goes somewhere, only if we use it, for example, by the means of biochar and find a great application for it, as Nadav just showed, only then can we provide carbon finance, because only then will there be no risk of reversal, because that's exactly what it's all about. We can't just remove carbon from the atmosphere. We need to make sure that there will be no reversal of the sequestration of the carbon. How do we provide quality to such a credit? How do we provide credibility? First of all, we do the quantification that we do by measuring instead of modeling. So when we use biochar as an example, which is a brilliant example, we take a lab analysis of the physical biochar, we take a look into the carbon content of that very biochar, and we just multiply it times the batches, times the production. So there will be an audit for the suppliers that we have who audit the weight, the volume of the physical biochar that goes through the process. So unlike the so reduced emission from degradation and deforestation or forestry projects that are on the market, we do quantify by measuring instead of modeling, which provides a minimal margin of error, way less than it is in most of the modelings that are being done in the market currently. We do have that verified by a third party. So it's not just that we say, you have 100 corks now, you have 100 carbon removal certificates. We hire and pay for third-party auditors. That would be DNV, SCS, all those renowned auditors that there are. And all the credits that we work on are ex post. So only when you produce biochar and it is, you found a final end site where to put it, usually soil applications, will there be the actual cork, and can the cork be used as a retirement? One major thing that is a difference to how the carbon market used to work in the past is that we are looking only long term. So we want to look beyond the peak of human emissions, which we expect to be somewhere in the middle of this century that we're in right now, which is why we took currently the minimum threshold of permanence for a project certified under Puro to be at 100 years at least, and we're going to more than 1,000 years in future. And that is actually also that a thing that comes from the buyer side. So the demand side, the buyers of this market demand much more longer permanence than just what's been in the past. Because traditionally, you could theoretically now go ahead and just buy a carbon credit from forestry, from a REP project, from renewables, that would usually have to prove a permanence of 30 years and could theoretically afterwards be cut down again. And that is not the case with the projects we are working on. Very important also is the dependency on carbon finance. So if there is already finance for a project, there's no reason to bring carbon finance into it. So it's really important for us to have a measurable baseline, and combining all of those different factors. That is when we create the cork, the CO2 removal certificate, which always represents for a ton of carbon removed net from circulation. And putting that now a little more into clear figures and to a graph. Let's assume we've got on the left side, the column is e-stored. So let's assume you've got a batch of biochar that represents a gross value of sequestration of 3.31 tons of carbon. We need to subtract the emissions that came from in the production of the biomass per se. Then we need to deduct the emissions that were caused in the production of the biochar itself, so not of the biomass, but of the physical biochar. And then we also need to account for all the emissions that are being caused during use. So we exclude from the gross sequestration potential all those emissions from logistics, from energy consumption, anything that was used, and only stay with the very net amount that is left, which is then finally the cork. And now transporting the message of the cork into the voluntary carbon market, it's great to have a cork, but the question is, who wants that? Is there a market for it? Spoiler, yes, there is. That's a really good thing. Taking a look at the map right here and into the history that we've done in the past. We started in 2019 with issuances relatively low at 5,000 tons, which means that across all the methodologies that we had back then, which were mainly bio-based building and material elements, so those could have been wooden houses, but also biochar, the issuances were at 5,000 tons. We were able to increase that by 500% the year afterwards, in the year 2020, to more than 20,000 tons, then had another fivefold growth to 100,000 tons in 2021. Last year went to nearly 250,000 tons. This year, we will be at more than 350,000 tons. So we are facing a dramatic growth, and we are trying to continue to grow massively, because our clear goal is to sequester 10 billion tons of carbon per year in the midterm future, because we assume that that is what the market needs. There's just no way around climate change. We are doing this currently, as you can see on the world map, globally, with a global scale. So that's virtually anywhere there's a lot of potential for growth, and specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically in India and Southeast Asia, but basically anywhere on Earth, is there massive potential for growth in order to produce those cogs. And the question is, who are the buyers? Who is it that buys such products? The good thing is there's a lot of those, and there's a lot of those that have really high profiles that everyone knows. So Microsoft, for example, was one of the first major high-profile buyers that used cogs. They did a tender where they allowed applications for their carbon removals that they were seeking to source. 180 applications were there for, out of which 5 made it to the final round. And 3 out of those 5 that made it to the final round and were finally purchased were Puro certified. So that's where Puro could already prove quite well the proof of concept, specifically on biochar. So the projects that were bought back then were specifically biochar projects. But it's also the Swiss Re, Zurich Insurance, Shopify, but not just the companies you see here, Boston Consulting Group, Ernst & Young. So really major players that traditionally have been relatively high margin, low emission businesses, but that is shifting currently to see that it's gaining more traction in the mass market, in the standard voluntary carbon market, where buyers would just seek not anymore cheap, dubious, and maybe projects and credits where doubt might be allowed. That is less and less the case. So there's more and more traction that we're getting, even though the prices are significantly higher for the carbon removals as we consider them, so the CDR projects, in comparison to the traditions of the market. And now, mentioning the price, the question is, where is it? We are the only standard on Earth that has a comprehensive price reporting. So we want the projects, in that case you, to understand what is it that the end buyers pay. So what is the price that the final cork will be retired at? And as you can see here, it's a little small, but it's publicly available. If you go to Puro.Earth, check out the resources, and then go to the Cork X index, you will see that currently it's the index says that the biochar corks are traded at roughly 140 euros on average. That's the average price currently. And to give you a perspective on that, the general voluntary carbon market, not to be confused with the compulsory carbon market. So what we do is really on the voluntary carbon market side. That is none of the obligations that a company would have. So they basically do it because they want to, because there's pressure from the public to compensate emissions or to have a climate strategy, to have a net zero goal. And the entire market, the voluntary carbon market, is worth roughly 2 billion euros. It was last year. This year, we're expecting a exponential growth to that. And obviously, carbon dioxide removal, the long-term hybrid technical removals, are a fraction, or just a fraction of that. Nevertheless, the growth is astronomous, and the demand is currently by far outperforming supply. And we as Puro now have the big challenge to grow supply and demand at the same time, because having too much of one is not really good for the market to grow. Okay, what is it then that you have to do in order to become eligible to be a Puro supplier? First of all, you have to have at least the idea for a project, as you guys have. So I guess most of you in the audience will already be involved in whatever kind of either greenfield, brownfield, or existing operation that is negative. What we do is we check the project's eligibility, where in the case of biochar, mainly on what is the feedstock, where does it come from, does it compete with food production, what's the context of it, what is the machinery that's being used, is it low-tech versus high-tech, what about pyrolysis gases, what do you do with the methane, what is the output, the final biochar, what's the quality of the final biochar, what's the carbon content of the biochar, where do you sell it to, and how do you make sure that there will be no risk of reversal? Is it going to be a soil application, a non-soil application? So those are the main criteria that we check against. Then once you register with us and once you onboard your first facility, each pyrolysis machine would be considered a facility in our language. You could do them individually. Then we will send a third-party auditor onto your site that will audit whether what you've said in step 1 here was true, whether that is correct. And after that, we get the audit statement. We take that in order to issue the corks for you that will go onto your account, and you're then the owner of it. So you're on top of that. You can decide yourselves as a project what do you do with it? So unlike the rest of the carbon market, where it's relatively normal to have a project developer that takes your volumes, that takes your projects, and also the credits, and thus the biggest part of the margins, you will be on top of that. So you will be the ones deciding whether or not to sell it to customer A, whether to get in touch with the marketplace. We are very happy to facilitate. We are very happy to bring the right buyers, to bring the right sales channels, the marketplace to you, but we will not be a part of the transaction. We need to be a standard. We want to be neutral. And the interesting part is that everything in this entire chain up to number 4 is free of cost. There's a single cost that you would have, that any supplier would have, but anyone who joins the Puro family would have, is a platform agreement that comes at 900 euros per year. That's it. Those are the upfront costs. There's no cost for certification. There's no cost for revision of what you hand in. There's no cost for the entire guidance that we take you through. There's no cost for the audit. We pay for the audit. We pay for the auditor. Because we understood that carbon finance can only work if we implement much and many more de-risking factors. The big problem is that we're speaking to so many investors that say, we've boatloads of money and we don't know how to deploy it because there's too much risk. While on the other side, there's dozens of projects that are either thinking about a net negative process or want to scale up the net negative processes. And we need to bridge that gap at some point in time. And because in the beginning, there's this risk, well, you don't have a project, well, there is no credit yet. Who invests in such projects? So we play the de-risking factor by not charging any cost upfront, by saying the entire things upfront, there will be no financial risk for a supplier that joins us. Obviously, in the end, we will need to make some money. That is clear, because otherwise we won't be here anymore in the near future. What we do is, once again, the pre-issuance, as you can see, we don't charge anything upfront, no methodology development, no revision cost, no project registration. None of that. The only thing that we charge is that once you find a buyer, once somebody wants to buy a core from you, pays you, only then will we send a fee, which is basically the service fee that averages currently 8%. The bigger the project gets, the lower so in production volume per year, the lower the percentage gets, and we get to less than 1% if you go to the highest production amount. What that ends up with is a whopping 92% of the total carbon finance going on your desk, which is anywhere near possible for anything that is happening on the market right now. So 92% currently an average of the final core price would go into our supplier's desk, which is what we are really trying to emphasize. We wanted to be transparent. We put all our fees transparently on our website. You can see that everyone, the buyer and the seller, everyone can see what the part is, because we need to come to a market where the people that really bring the added value, which are you guys, the guys that are doing the actual carbon sequestration, those are the ones that need to profit from it, because carbon finance is basically there in order to allow for you to scale your businesses. And in the perfect case, in 15, 20 years, if everything works as we should, there's no need for carbon credits anymore, because we allow you to scale to an extent to make the biochar much more competitive in pricing, that carbon finance will not be necessary anymore. But as of now, we understand that there might be an additional revenue stream needed if you want to use biochar instead of charcoal, for example, and that's what we're here for. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are right now.